Welcome to Dynasty Football Analytics. I am Adam Wilson. I did not write a book. You can find me at AJWilly2 on Twitter, and I'm here with Jordan McNamara. He did write a book. Find him at McNamara Dynasty. So today, we just wanted to talk Dynasty. We didn't really have too big a topic, so we're kind of gonna get into some narratives that are current in Dynasty, how to exploit them, probably talk about startup markets, our startup drafts. I've got one going on. Jordan, you've got one going on. And then probably into some roster construction stuff. So, Jordan, let's kick it off. Let's just get into it. So, narratives that are current in Dynasty. So, you've been having a lot of chatter on Twitter lately. So have I. So, give me a narrative.
Well, how about let's talk specifically about this Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette debate that was embroiling the Twitter sphere earlier this week and into today as well. I find these debates and these topics, we've talked about this a little bit, Damian Williams and guys like Corey Davis, and they're proxy for bigger things, which I love as a debate form, as how to think about, a lot of what we've been talking about is how should we think about these sorts of things? What types of things should we be looking at? How do we go about analyzing these things? And, we were talking off air a little bit. I'm sort of interested in this new book that Annie Duke wrote. I haven't read it yet, but I was listening to her talk. She's a poker player, and she was talking a lot about the uncertainty that we make in decisions and how we really know if they're good or bad. And that whole idea was interesting to me. And how do we apply it to what we do in terms of Dynasty? And so one of the things that this Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, the certainty around it's really, people have these, really strong opinions about things that we don't really have we don't know. Right. But one of the things that I love to do is really look at the history of them. And let's say, what's the prior on a round 1 running back versus a round 5 running back? Yeah. What does that mean? What do we expect out of those types of things and out of those types of assets, and really look at players as categories. And if you sort of take away all of the stories about a player, and we see this with players all the time, right? AJ Green's old, or he's hurt, or whatever story that is current at the moment.
Tyreek Hill,
whatever story is current, and we see these things take over, and there's so much recency bias in the market. And I'm doing some research in terms of what really predicts the next year's ADP in terms of a number of factors. And you would be amazed at how much it just goes off of last year's points. Not everything, but last year's points explains a ton about what the next year's ADP is, right? So the 2018 finish of a player in terms of total points will tell you a ton about what the next year's market's going to be. And that can be good, right? That can make sense in certain places. Saquon Barkley, for example, he scored really high. He should be really high. But there's other factors that go into it. And when we see these things about Aaron Jones and Fournette and these types of conversations, I think they're great proxies for the way we should be looking at these types of decisions. So one of the things I saw was that better production of offense. Right. The argument was, Green Bay's offense was actually better. And so in the book, I actually did this analysis. And one of the things I found was, and you're obviously familiar with the book because you were one of my proofreaders, and I have a chart in the book, and it essentially ranks teams by scoring offense. In terms of in the 4 quadrants. So top 8, 9 through 16, 7 through 24, bottom 8, right? Those four categories. And it basically looks at after their past season, right? So 2000 for us, it would be their 2018 finish. What's that say about their next year, 2019 finish in terms of top 24 running backs, right? Who produces the running backs? And I'll tell you what, there's no significant difference. They're all equal. I mean, they're within 0.5 of each other. So the highest is right basically the top 16 offenses, the top two groups. So 1 through 8, 9 through 16, both finished with 6.2 top 24 running backs the next season. Running 17 through 24 finishes with 5.9, and the bottom 8 offenses finished with 5.7. There's no difference in terms of how these teams produce. So that's really one thing when we think about, and people want to see, there's a ton that we don't know. It is April. The NFL draft hasn't happened. We have no idea what these offenses are going to look like in terms of how they're going to produce points. And so when people are making these broad declarations about, Jacksonville could go in and totally overhaul their offensive line, right? They could do a variety of things, right? They could trade up to 1 and get Kyler Murray or whatever. I mean, there's so many things that seems like an unlikely thing, but there's so many of these things that could happen that would change the market. We just have no idea at this point what they are. And that just, right. This chart and this work that I did essentially shows us that it doesn't really matter in terms of it. So when you see, I think that's a particularly good narrative to exploit, because it's not a scenario where it matters all that much, and people think that it does. And I just, if you sort of go off of, hey, they're a bad offense last year, a lot of times these teams turn it around relatively quickly because coordinators get fired, quarterbacks get changed, coaching staff change. I mean, all of those things happen and teams change over relatively quick. So when we expect a static holdover from last year, it's something that historically hasn't happened for running backs.
Yeah, and I didn't really need to read your book to know that the offense plays minimally into this, or whether it's a good offense or a bad offense. Exactly what you said, because there's all sorts of different factors, right? Like, you don't know if Jacksonville is going to go and draft 3 interior offensive linemen. Now all of a sudden the line's good, like first 3 picks. You don't know about coordinator changes. Like, all these things are stuff that change from year to year. You're talking about with top 6 or running backs in the top 24. Well, that's going to change if a running back gets hurt, right? Or if a receiver gets hurt, or with how they use the running back. So I'm not really surprised at any of that. But to me, well, and just what you said, the offense that they're in is not something that I would be considering anyway. Like, I guess it's a nice to have, but we have seen so many times running backs in bad offenses produce. So
yeah, and it matters more at different positions, right?
I'm sure. Yes,
it matters, and that's why when people, I think the context is key in any decision you make in life, but in particular in these sorts of scenarios, different scoring and different rules, they affect different positions. Same thing with different offenses. And one of the things that I talked about in the book, and I think I haven't tested this, but one of my theories would be that why do bad offenses maintain okay running backs? Well, typically running the ball is you're less likely to score if you're running the ball a lot, right?
Yes.
So high volume in terms of, I'm going to pound the ball 27 times with my running back, right? If those as passes would be higher expected outcome in terms of points. And so if you're running the ball a ton and feeding a running back, that actually helps your running back scoring, but hurts your offense, right? So it's essentially they're getting a bigger share of a smaller pie, essentially, is what you're talking about.
It's counterproductive.
Yes, exactly.
To one another.
from a team scoring perspective, but from a individual player perspective, it's opportunities key. So that's one of those things. But when you look at and in the current year, right? Current year. So if we're evaluating, the actual current year,
Yeah,
it does have an impact, right? There's certainly the better offenses produce better, but that is not sticky year over year. And that's, I think, the trap that people get into, right? So, for example, I didn't incorporate the 2018 data into this book because I wanted to get the book out. But from 2008 to 2017, the bottom 8 offenses basically produced 3.7 top 24 running backs. Okay, so 15% of the running backs, they produce 15% of the top 24 running backs. The top half, right? So 1 through 8 and then 9 through 16, they produce 60%, right? So they each produce 30. So together they produce 60. So they were twice as likely to produce a top 24 running back than the bottom 8 offenses, which I think makes sense because we're going back and we're knowing, hey, this team scored a lot of points. So there was probably more scoring. And what you'll notice is quarterback production is really sticky, right? Because the offenses, the top offenses are run by top quarterbacks who are good year over year. So
yes.
they are more sticky. Tight end was all over the place. If you just took out Rob Gronkowski, right? If you took out Gronkowski, it was essentially a random walk in terms of how tight ends were the next year. And so when you think about those things, right? When you think about how that production comes together and you see people dropping Did I cut out?
Yes.
Okay. Can we clean that up, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back a second then.
Sure.
What was the last thing when I think I said when you talk about player X?
Yes.
Okay. So when you talk about player X and how his team did last year, I think if that is really moving the market or people are using that as an argument for a player to drop in price or be overvalued or whatever particular narratives attached with it, especially at running back and tight end, that's a really good place to exploit in terms of that's not really something that we should be factoring into what their production will be this year.
I'm totally with you. And the tight ends, they're kind of like that's another area where I feel like there's just a lot of plug and play, kind of like running back, right? Like, you have these guys. Well, first of all, there's a big disparity in the top talents and with the bottom talents. Like there's a big gap. You have a couple Kelsey and Ertz and everything, and then you got guys like Ian Thomas, who's I don't know, rate him right 20th best tight end in the NFL. I don't know. I think when it comes to that, I'm not surprised with that also. And then the other thing is how many offenses actually game plan their tight end. Like not every offense is going to incorporate their tight end, or know how to do it. So I think that those positions are very comparable when we're talking about this.
Yeah, for sure. So that's one thing that when you see these Fournette and Jones debates, those types of things going on, thinking about those types of players when you're doing rankings or making decisions on the clock or whatever particular decision that you have to make in terms of that. That's one thing that I would avoid.
Well, I don't think that with these, and again, you and I talked about this kind of off air. Like, I don't think that these are the decisions that you should be having. Like, you shouldn't be deciding between Leonard Fournette and Aaron Jones, because I think people look at these backs as, from a talent standpoint or what they like and what they see on the field. I think you should look at it like the things that you have to incorporate into these are, draft pedigree and their athletic testing numbers. So I don't think the conversation should ever be a Fournette versus an Aaron Jones. That's just not I feel like that's bad process if you're trying to compare those two and pick between them. Leonard Fournette, you should be talking about Leonard Fournette with another high pedigree running back, in my opinion, with ideal height and weight. He wasn't an outlier, produced in college, dominator ratings, things like that. And, this is an analytics podcast, but I will admit that I'm a little bit behind on it. I'm more tape and what I see on the field. But one thing that I've learned is these things matter and it should be incorporated into your process. So I think that this is just bad process, debating between a 5th round running back who, was from, what is he from, Idaho or something like that. Versus, the number 1 recruit in the country from a giant school who produced as a freshman, who got picked in the top 5 of the NFL draft. Like, you have to compare Leonard Fournette to another player like Leonard Fournette at that position, not a 5th round running back who happened to get into Green Bay's offense.
Right. So yeah, he in UTEP. UTEP.
Yeah, UTEP. Yeah.
It might seem like Idaho, but it's UTEP. So, and by the way, we're both proponents of Fournette. So in case there was any dispute and any question about that, we're both clearly in the Fournette over Aaron Jones. But so the other thing too that an additional thing I saw was that Aaron Jones is more productive than he was more productive than Fournette was last year. And well, actually, on a per game basis, Fournette produced more points than Aaron Jones.
I was going to say that
from one of them, by the way. But
that's something that people don't think. They just look at Fournette and they're like, well, he was injured for 8 weeks or whatever. But if you look at when he came back, like, he was putting up 15 points a game plus, on average or whatever. So
he averaged 15 points a game last year, where Jones was not far off, but less per game.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get these things like he can't catch and all of that stuff, which he was catching about 3 passes a game last year, right? So, and when you think about that, extrapolated over a 16-game season, and you get 48, and that's actually not a bad number, right? So these things just get said, and they get said thousands of times, so they become true. But I would really caution people. Fournette was just short of he had 22 receptions last year in 8 games. So if you bump that out, it's 44 over a 16-game season.
Well, I got to be honest,
I don't think that's a bad number.
No, it's not. But I don't really care anyway. Like, so that is something that I have heard because I've always been a big Fournette guy. And not a big Fournette guy, but I liked him more than a lot of people. And that was the reason that they didn't like him, was because he couldn't catch. And so after his rookie year, even my co-host on Top Dog Dynasty podcast, Chris, he would be like, well, he can't catch the ball. Well, I don't really care if he catches the ball or not. I've already seen him be a top 10 running back in a PPR league. So that's not really a thing to me. He doesn't catch the ball, but he still is I think he was RB6 as a rookie or RB5 or something like that. So if he is getting points for me without catching the ball, that's fine. I know that he puts up numbers in a PPR league either way. It doesn't make any difference to me as long as he's putting up points. But I agree. I think that that's not true, that he can't catch the ball. He just can't catch the ball like an Alvin Kamara or a McCaffrey or something like that. He's more than capable of getting 30 catches a season. So that's not a hard number for him to get. So.
Yeah. One other thing too is Aaron Jones has 5.5 yards per attempt, and Fournette has 3.3.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Well, one of the least sticky stats year over year is yards per carry.
Yes.
And so when you see an argument sort of, or when you're reading an article or listening to a podcast and people tout last year's yards per carry, mm-hmm. It is largely a random walk year over year. The last year is not very predictive of this year, and there's a number of reasons for that. But that's an area of when the low number is driving a player's price down, or a high mm-hmm. number is driving a player's price up. You should take the other side of the bet.
Exploit
Okay.
that.
Exploit that. That's an easily exploitable one. Same thing with points per target for receptions. That is arbitrary year over year. So when DeAndre Hopkins had basically 1.3 points per target, PPR points per target, in what would that have been? 15. That was incredibly low as a number, right? That's way outside the normal range in which a player would achieve. And he has a massive bounce back the next year, right? So that didn't really tell us, and those stats don't really tell us a lot about a player's skill. They're largely luck dependent. There's a lot of other things that go into it, and they're not predictive year over year. So when you see these sorts of arguments and these sorts of things, they're easy to exploit. And so I think that's driving Fournette's stock way down.
Well, and you could point to Gurley a couple years ago too in the Jeff Fisher offense,
Right.
and so essentially this is just buying low and selling high on players. And you're selling high on the outliers and you're buying low on the players that you've seen do it before with, good metrics, right? Or good profiles is a better way of putting it. But yeah, the Fournette, obviously, so we talk about buying distressed assets. He's obviously a distressed asset right now. Aaron Jones, to me, is one that I want to sell high because I just don't believe in a 5th-round running back. And I believe that was a guy that I was getting off waivers. I didn't draft him anyway. But a day 3 running back, I'm going to bet against. Another example, and you and I have talked about it several times, is Philip Lindsay and his yards per carry, right? It was insanely high this year. Like, that's a narrative to bet against. So, yeah, I mean, and it unfortunately is that enough people are on that train now that Philip Lindsay and bet against that he is like dropping in startup drafts and you can't get, probably what you should for him. So,
do you think that's injury related?
Injury related for Philip Lindsay?
Yeah.
No, I think what it is that there's so many people talking about, him unlikely to do this again, that people are staying away. I think that there's enough people out there saying, stay away from Philip Lindsay, get rid of Philip Lindsay. Like, I'm in the startup now. I was shocked that he fell to round 9, pick 11. Like, I thought for sure that he would go in the 6th round. But I don't think it's because of injury. I just think I think enough people are getting it out there that to bet against. There's very few people in the Dynasty community, in the industry, people that are on the Philip Lindsay train, from what I can see. Now, I think that there are a lot of Dynasty players that really like him, but
interesting. But by and large, you don't think that it's you don't think you think there's individual players, but not really the market. The advice market, I would call it, is on Lindsay.
Yeah, I think it's mostly the industry. There's a big enough group of people.
Do you want to guess, in terms of running backs drafted since 2008, there's been 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 running backs drafted since 2008 that have been in the 5th round and produced a top 24 season. Aaron Jones is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to guess how many of those players have bounced back and had another top 24 season?
So who have done it a second time? Wait, so you want me to guess who well, first of all, I'm not even sure that I can name
there are. Guess how many there are.
I think that there's probably 2.
There's 1.
Okay,
do you know who it is?
No.
Jordan Howard.
Interesting. Okay. Another guy. Now, see, that's another one though, right? Like I feel like there's enough industry people who are against Jordan Howard at this point that even though he is produced for a couple seasons now Was he was top 24 3 years in a row, right? Isn't that what he was?
He's had 3 top 24 seasons in his career.
Yeah. So I think that there is enough people out there. Like if you own Jordan Howard, I think if you didn't listen to anyone else, I think that you would think that he's a really good player because you've had him on your team and you see what he can do. And funny enough is I see that with Aaron Jones. Like he's on my team. I know that he's going to get me points if he actually plays and continues to do what he's doing. It's a matter of betting on, whether he can keep this up for years. So,
right. And so you look at, again, that's one thing too, in terms of the comps, or right. The priors on what we should think about these players as categories.
Yeah.
The hit rate's really low. And not only is the hit rate really low, the bounce back rate is even lower. Okay. Yes. So when you look at that and compare that to round one running backs, right? 83% of them hit for top 24 seasons, right?
Yeah.
There's been 45 of them in terms of, there's been 23 running backs drafted in the first round of the NFL draft since 2008. There's been 45 top 24 seasons out of them, right? And there's some young guys in there too, right? So that number is really weighted down by guys like Barkley and there's been Gurley's brings it up a little bit, but there's been young guys recently that just haven't had the full longevity, right? Don't we expect a lot out of Barkley? We expect better out of Penny and Michelle, and we expect a lot more out of McCaffrey. And, so that number is actually going to be closer to, it should be closer to 3 in terms of what you would expect. But they just haven't aged through enough yet to get, there's been a recent supply of round one running backs who just haven't gotten that high. But when you really look at what they're producing, right, these guys get opportunities. And there's a reason why Leonard Fournette went in the top 5 of the NFL draft, right? Because he went to LSU as a big time recruit and produced well from a young age, came out and tested really well, and had checked basically every box in terms of all of that. And he goes in the top 5. And are there problems? Maybe, maybe there's something going on that we don't know. And there's a lot of that, right? But to try and play armchair quarterback or armchair psychologist, or pick apart front offices about things that we have no idea, or that we are just not in a position to know, to make big speculation bets on that I think is really problematic. But when you just compare the players or compare the types, that is a big difference in terms of how these guys, the baselines in which these guys are coming from, right? Aaron Jones, if he's going in the top 60 of standard leagues, stock PPR leagues, for him to actually produce that, he's going to have to be the best round 5 running back drafted in the past 10 years, really, probably since the 2000s, in all of the 2000s, right, to pay that off.
He's currently going 38th overall in PPR leagues. Yeah. Well, and then to go along with this, not to get off of the Aaron Jones thing, but there was also a Twitter question about, why someone give me a reason why Dalvin Cook is better than Marlon Mack. And so you commented in on this, and what did you say about fourth round running backs? Let's see. So running backs drafted in round 4 since 2008, only Lamar Miller and Devontae Freeman have hit multiple times. And so we were just talking about 5th round running backs, same thing with 4th round running backs. So like, I think in terms of this is just good for your process, right? Your dynasty process. So if you have low pedigree running backs and they hit, you need to be looking to deal with them. You need to be looking to capitalize on them. And, I actually think we talked about 2 of them. If I had Aaron Jones, I'm actually trying to incorporate him into deals to acquire Leonard Fournette. Like that's a trade that I want to be making. Now, obviously, you'd probably have to add something to it, but like I want to get rid of the guy who has produced with low pedigree for a guy who had a bad year with high pedigree at that position. Like that's a good move for me. So yeah, I think when we talk about decision making for our dynasty teams, uh, and like having a process, paying attention to these types of players in the later rounds of the NFL draft and for running backs is I think it's paramount. I think that always has to be in your mind. Like that's a staple for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look at the fact that Jordan Howard's one of the best day 3 running backs in recent history,
Mm-hmm.
and consider the fact that over the past 2 years he's produced you 0.25 wins over replacement combined, right?
Yes.
He's produced you a quarter of a win in the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm big on team running back, right? Lots of running backs, over half the roster of running backs, 3 times as many as receiver. You have to keep it in the context of what you're expecting, right?
Yeah.
I am not expecting the guy that I take in the 26th round, right? Demarie Crockett or whoever I take in the 26th round as a rookie to come in and produce me multiple years of starter, right?
Yeah.
I expect him to come in and hope that he gets a string of games that they're either usable or flippable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we upgrade someplace else. We upgrade a pick, right? We are using that asset and what we know about the productivity of players, and we're using it to get better players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't think about that necessarily because I really like Aaron Jones or I really like player Y, but that's really the process that you should be engaged in, right? Continue to, like you said, move up the board, get higher
Mm-hmm.
pedigree, get higher chances, take higher probability bets, turn a 5% bet into a 30% bet.
Yep.
And you do that 10 times over the course of a season, it's going to really, really move the needle. And so that's really the thing that I think that is lost in these sorts of debates, that you should step back and think about the baseline for these players. The injury prone thing, I would just point people to Dr. Chow. He talked a lot about this recently, actually on a podcast with Marcus McNeil, a former lineman who played for the Chargers when they're friends. Dr. Chow and Marcus McNeil are friends, and they talk a lot, have some funny stories and stuff, but they talk about running back injuries, and specifically Ryan Matthews and Natron Means and LT. And there was a lot of different, it was really fascinating inside look into some of the stuff. You should really go check that out in terms of what they're talking about in injury prone and how that's not really true and not what's happening, and a lot of different things that they talk about. But I think we don't know, right? Maybe players are injury prone, but we don't know a way to do it. And maybe sports science in the next 5 years catches up and tells us that, certain players, their body composition is just chemically wrong, so it makes them predisposed for hamstring injuries, something like that. But we're not in a position to know that. And just because it happened, anytime there's a recent injury that drives down a player's price, especially if it's not something debilitating in terms of broken neck or some catastrophic, Alex Smith almost loses his leg, thank God he didn't, those sorts of things. Anytime that injury that isn't something that's debilitating really drives down a player's cost, that's something that's really interesting. Andrew Luck was a good example of that last year. It was a high risk bet, but the cost got I got him in the 10th or 11th round of a startup draft as like quarterback 12. Right? That's a massive, massive payoff on that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Luck because I ended up trading Jameis Winston for him straight up during all that. And then later in the season, I ended up dealing him for a 2021st and a 2023rd. So it's like I just turned, Jameis Winston, what's he worth, into 2021st and, third. One thing that you brought up there was you were talking about bets, right? like that's what Dynasty is. It's all a bet, right? Like you're betting on these players. And obviously you have guys like Saquon Barkley that have a better chance at hitting. Like that's a safer bet, right? So I think that it's just getting in the business of uh, acquiring players that are safer bets like that, and you're not going to be able to acquire them all when they're at the top of their value. So I think when you should be grabbing these guys, that's what you should be doing, is the ones that are distressed assets, they're better bets. That's when you should be getting them. Now, maybe that happens with Saquon Barkley at some point. Maybe that happens, but we saw it with Gurley. Right now is Fournette. I think that that's the business that you need to be getting in. So.
Yeah, especially when they go down in price.
Yeah,
the price of Fournette right now, and I've done 2 Superflex drafts in the past 6 weeks, I would say, something like that.
Yep.
And he's gone in the 4th in both of them.
Yeah,
you just look at top 5 draft pick who's not old, and it just seems like in terms of players that could be a top 12 startup pick 12 months from now that are outside the top 36 in drafts, he's right there on the top of the list.
Yeah, I picked him at 405 in the recent one that I'm in. And I had 3 4th-round picks, 405, 409, and 412. My guess is that I could have gotten him later than 405.
He had to trade up for all those picks, huh? That's pretty good.
No, I didn't have to trade up. I traded back, buddy.
I know.
You know that. Yeah, it's
there goes Adam trading up again.
Just
constantly devoid of late picks and giving future first for force. And
so that's interesting. All right, so maybe this is another narrative because I actually tweeted out that it's amazing that the value of 2020 firsts when trying to acquire them, people value them so high. But as soon as you're trying to sell them to people, they don't want to give you what they were trying to get them at, right? Like they don't they don't value them the same. So one of the things that I was trying to do in the startup draft was I was trying to trade down because I don't trade up ever, actually. I'm trying to trade down and then I'm trying to acquire 2020 first, but like the value that I'm getting on these things are just crap, right? So it gets to the mid second round, and then I start saying like, all right, well, let's exploit this, right? If they are valuing these things so high, I wonder if I can get a give my 2020 first for a second round startup pick. And so I start sending these offers out, and people are getting pissed at me. Like actually like making comments in the rejection notices or the rejection emails, the comments part of it, like, calling me out for even trying to do it. Like I'm a moron. It's like, well, if you guys are going to value these things so high, then why can't I, why can't I exploit it the other way? And
all you need is one buyer. Right?
I tried one buyer. The entire second round, I was trying to acquire, and like I had one guy message me like, "Can we find some common ground? Because I can't sell it for 204 straight up or 205 straight up." And it's like, well, no, I don't want to go from 308 to 204 for a 2019 first. Like I'm trying to do it straight up. Like that's what I'm trying to exploit here.
Right.
So I think it's funny how they value them one way when you're trying to get it from them, but as soon as you're trying to sell them, they don't want to pay you that. So
yeah, that's something we see in life, right?
Yeah.
I'll buy my house for something. Now that I'm in here, I'm not going to necessarily sell it for a little bit more than I bought it for, because the pain of moving, I've got a family, I really hate to move, I hate house buying, all of those things, right? It then becomes, I need a much higher price or some other reason to actually sell it. And so it's an interesting, when you see that in a market, I think you're right though, right? There becomes a point where I am in the camp that future picks are underrated or undervalued. It'll be interesting to see how crazy 2020 gets, right? And part of the reason I'm doing startups right now is because rookie fever is on, set in a little bit in terms of this year. So you get there is some value in being able to get future picks. I've been able to add, I think, over 2 startups recently. I think I was able to get three or 4 or 5 additional 2021st. And I sort of look at these things as a portfolio approach. So I look at my team sort of as a collective of assets, and it gives me additional assets where it's tough to trade for them in existing leagues, right? So
Yeah.
I'm able to sort of get that type of asset, that type of player, that type of profile on in my portfolio at a cheaper price than I would in an existing league. And that's one of the way I'm trying to exploit the 2020 draft right now, because I think it's going to be pretty good. But in startup drafts, they're acquirable.
Mhm.
Does there become a time where where it just becomes too much of a value, right? Where it becomes they become so expensive that you can get the startup pick, right? Get the top 30 startup pick for a future first. I don't know, but it'll be, if that happens, I'll probably do it.
Well, and that's what I was saying to myself. Like, I hate trading up, and I don't want to be in the business of trading future picks, because I want to stockpile assets, just like you say. But we're in the late second round, and I'm saying to myself, if I trade for this pick and I take Amari Cooper or I take Russell Wilson, and this is a super flex league, next year, can I sell? Are they worth the 2021st? No, they're not worth the 2021st. They're worth more than the 2021st. As a matter of fact, a month from now, they're probably worth more than the 2021st, or weeks from now. So that's kind of what I was going to. But I'm getting the same offers back, like, well, 304 and a 2021st for 204. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, that's not the move that I want to be making here. I'm just trying to exploit this, and I just it's just kind of funny how they're valued one way when you're trying to acquire them, they're valued a different way when you're trying to sell them. So
yeah, have you noticed, what's your thoughts on, you're in a super flex draft right now, what's your thoughts on the quarterback market?
So I've been in 2 of them so far in the past like 2 months, and it's funny, the drafts have been very different. In one, the quarterbacks were gone before you knew it. Like 4th round, you're at quarterback like 19. In this draft, they lasted a surprisingly long time. So I was texting you about it. I picked up Ben Roethlisberger in the 8th round of this one as my QB3. There was lots of starting quarterbacks still available in it. So I think it kind of depends on the draft. But in terms of the market of the quarterbacks, I find myself, there's maybe 8 that I'm comfortable with being my QB1 in a super flex. I think it's 6 to 8, something like that.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit all over the place, but some of the players that I've seen fall, Tom Brady, for example, is one.
Well, yeah.
He's going outside of the top. I think in both leagues that I've done that have been super flex recently, I believe he was quarterback 29 and 31.
Mm-hmm.
And that just seems, when you
insane.
fit them all together, it's like, okay, there's some spots that he should clearly be above, but he went behind Nick Foles, Drew Lock, Mariota in the 11th round as quarterback 31 in the one I just did last week.
So he went ahead of all of those. Mariota was behind him, Derek Carr was behind him, Dalton, Rosen, Foles. But like Roethlisberger went ahead of him, Allen went ahead of him, Lamar Jackson went ahead of him, Phillip Rivers, Garoppolo, Trubisky. No, I like him as my QB3, especially if you had a younger quarterback. I think he's perfect. I think that there are a ton of options with that, right? So one, you can just keep him on your team. He can be your QB 2 or 3, whether depending on whether you have like a younger QB. If you know, maybe your QB2 is Kyler Murray. And then the other option is he's very flippable, right? Like someone who that's an easy flip in season to a contender who is weak at their QB2. And that's kind of why I like him. And Drew Brees is the same way.
Let me ask you this. So I'm just four players in a box. Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, Derek Carr. What do you think about 3 of those making out the top 3 of a quarterback depth chart on a dynasty team? Brees, Rivers, Roethlisberger, Derek Carr. You could take any 3 that you want.
I'm taking.
How would you feel?
I'm taking. I'd be good short term for sure. But
that was the 9th round.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, it's insane. Like the 8th round that I picked Ben Roethlisberger 801, and he was like QB3 or 4 last year. Yeah, it's crazy, and especially I think the reason is because we're in super flexes. Everybody knows the narrative of the cheapest time to get quarterbacks is in the startup draft, right? And so I think what happens is people know that, and they don't want to be in the business of buying a quarterback later on. So they're staying away from those older guys who could possibly retire. And I don't think that, again, like we talk about process, I'm not sure that that's great process. I have no issue with any of those guys being on my team. I mean, I would just want to make sure that I have another quarterback who's younger with them. I
feel like you can make a really like a big time push in year 1.
Oh, for sure.
Drafting quarterback. Hey, let's pencil in round 7, 8, and 9 in a super flex startup. I'm going to take a quarterback in each of those rounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first 6, I'm just going to hammer running back. And I am tempted to do this. I am tempted to go into a draft and essentially try and pen players in. I'm going to take AJ Green. I'm going to take Will Fuller. I'm going to take Doug Baldwin, right? There's going to be players that at their value, I think can outproduce it, and then try and take 4 or 5 running backs early. That's exactly the antithesis of what I would normally do in a draft, right? That's everything I preach against, but I want to, as sort of a thought experiment, just because of the way, historically, I don't think this is possible, but based on the way I would say 10 players are falling, I think it's possible to have an absolute juggernaut based around quote unquote decaying wide receivers and aging quarterbacks. And it'll be an interesting thought experiment. I don't know if I'll ever fully feel comfortable doing it because of how opposite of what I usually do it is. But I think the market is sometimes, right? Sometimes we like to do what we're comfortable doing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the market presents opportunities that you can exploit. And it's probably a league by league thing. I'm not sure I would suggest it. I generally wouldn't say that I would suggest radical strategies to listeners or to followers or to people I talk to with the book strategy sessions or anything like that. I don't typically advise anything radical in terms of, I think, just stay within the box, sort of do efficient things. Your team will be pretty good. But as a thought experiment, I'm really tempted to try it and just see what happens, because I think there's value in how the quarterback's structured, and there's 3 or 4 wide receivers that are falling to such an extent that you can really get, especially with an early trade down, you can just hammer a really good running back core and fill it in with aging guys at the back and just and truly maximize your roster early on. It'd be an interesting thought experiment.
So it's funny that you say that, about the quarterbacks, with those older guys, because when I'm in quarterback premium leagues in a startup draft, the team that normally wins the first year is the team that sits back and waits on quarterback. And so last year I did a startup. I just looked it up. The guy who won, he had a very, very dominant team. I think he was like 12-1. I think he had Yeah, he was 12-1 on the season. So this was a 2-quarterback, 2-tight end league. And everyone was sucking up the quarterbacks really quick. So when it got to 406, which is the first time that he picked a quarterback, he went Saquon Barkley in the first round, Kareem Hunt in the second round, Devontae Adams in the third round, and he had 2 fourth-round picks and 2 fifth-round picks. So he takes AJ Green with his first 4th-round pick, and then after he goes quarterback. Now his quarterbacks: Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, and then he follows it up with a rookie, Sam Darnold. I mean, he dominated the league, but I mean, he exploited that part, right? Like everybody else was going quarterback heavy, and he sat back and he took the position players that fell to him that shouldn't have been there. Like Saquon Barkley, even though he was a rookie in a 2-quarterback league, he fell to 108 because those quarterbacks were bumping him up, and he just sat there and took them. And that's what happens with these. You only need a couple players to really win leagues, for one season. Like I've seen it over and over and over again. And so he kind of got lucky at his quarterback position. I mean, Matt Ryan and Drew Brees were top, 4 quarterbacks last year. And then he had the usual suspects at the other positions that were performing. He had the wide receiver 1, and he had the, running back, whatever Barkley was. 1, 2, 3, something like that. So you only need a couple of these guys to hit. So I think it's what you're talking about with the strategy of getting those 8th-round quarterbacks. I think it's going for broke in the first year of a startup. I think that would work.
Yeah, I think so. And that's by and large, just the numbers that I looked at and everything. It's tough to do that. It's a low probability bet in terms of taking all running backs really early and having them all hit. It is an extremely unlikely outcome, right? It's a lot less likely than folks think that they would hit as top 6 running backs or top 12 it's a rarity to take, and I think I look specifically at if you took 2 in the first round historically, what that would mean. And it's that they would finish in the top 12 at the position in year 1. And it was less than 40%. And I think if you think about that, I think that the person that trading up is making a bet that's probably double that in terms of what their odds think that would be. So, but I think if you did it right, I'm probably going to jump back in and start and try it just to try it. Just so
it definitely is an interesting experiment. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Real quick, we're running over. We got talking. Shocking. I ended up my startup draft, and we can probably at some point talk a little bit more in depth about some of the decisions that I made tonight. Wasn't really that topic. 4 quarterbacks, 16 running backs, 5 wide receivers, 3 tight ends. I finished market neutral in terms of quarterbacks. I think the average might have been just a shade over 4, but I'm right about the number. Ryan Fitzpatrick is my quarterback 4. I've got 3 good starters. 16 running backs. I'm twice as heavy as the average team. 5 wide receivers. I'm half as heavy as the average team, and tight ends. I'm about just a little bit below the pace in terms of tight ends. The reaction was, as I would expect, what are you doing? Why so many running backs? Why not enough? Why not more receivers? I'm not saying I put it out there for shock value or did it for shock value, right? This is the analysis was done, and this is the efficient way to do it. And I think I took 6 running backs in between round 21 and 28. Do all of them start the season on my roster? Probably not. Are multiple of them cuts in season? Probably. But the advantage that you have when you do it that way is there's value in knowing early on, right? Yep. There's value in drafting a guy like Bo Scarborough at 402 in a rookie draft last year and him getting cut.
Yep.
Because right? Yep. That's a lot of information that he bounces around in multiple teams. That gives you, right? We talk about not having a lot of information about players and what's going on.
Yep.
When multiple teams move on from a player, that gives you a lot of information. You can move on from that, and you didn't pay anything, right? You paid 402 in a rookie draft, or 408, or whatever you paid, right? It wasn't anything inside the top 35, right? And that's a lot of how I view the back end of drafts. And I think people think it's Dynasty, so you got to play it long term all throughout. And you should try and play Dynasty long term, right? I'm not a go year to year guy, right? You want to build it early, but different parts of the draft take on different areas. And later in the draft, Jordan from 5 years ago would have never thought this. Later in the draft, it is okay to miss, especially miss early, in terms of, hey, he gets cut in July, right? Like, okay, like we move on, right? But there's a lot of guys, Alfred Blue, in that range that people might not think highly of him. He's a Leonard Fournette punching someone on the sideline, Leonard Fournette doing something stupid, from being the starting running back as of right now. Do they draft somebody? Probably. Do they bring in another free agent? Maybe. Right? Is he going to be day one the backup running back to Fournette? Maybe not, but in the 27th round of a startup draft, that is a really intriguing possibility, right? And that's a lot of how I went with building, and it got to a point where I could have drafted. There was 25 running backs that if we kept going, I would have kept. There was guys I would have kept taking, right? Because they're interesting, and it's a really contrarian. And when you look at the rosters and you draft that way, and you and Chris jokingly talk about the analytics of Dynasty build, right? That what the team looks like, that you can identify a purchaser of Jordan's book.
Yep.
And I was the only one in the league that looked like that. Right. Yep. And again, it's you're getting 10% edge on every pick, and it's low percentage bets, right? The odds that Alfred Blue finishes as a top 24 running back, 15, 20%, right? It's probably even lower than that. That's probably an aggressive outlook, but I would think there's probably a pretty good chance that I get three or four shots at starting him in a flex. And that's actually a good outcome from that deep in a draft.
Well, when you look at the teams that are built like that, and my teams look a lot like yours in terms of roster construction, I probably picked it up from you, although I think I would have figured it out, because when you look at your team and you have 16 wide receivers, and the back end looks like Kevin White, Laquan Treadwell, Dante Moncrief, Devontae Parker, it's such an unattractive part of like a dynasty roster. And I still see people doing it. They have 20 wide receivers, and it's like, you never know when those guys are going to hit, right? Like, but if Leonard Fournette punches someone on the sideline and Alfred Blue is the backup, I know that he's going to start that week. And that's why I don't want to be in the business of having Kevin Whites and Laquan Treadwells on the back end of my roster. I would rather have Rod Smith, and even if you had CJ Anderson last year, you might have gotten away the entire year. Even though he got cut from Carolina, he might have just sat there. You were pretty happy about having him for the dynasty playoffs, right? Or Damian Williams, same thing.
Damian Williams, yeah. And it's funny because I was on guys like that last year, and on Malcolm Brown was one of my dudes, and I feel okay about the fact that it was the right type of bet to make. It just didn't work out, right? Because he gets hurt, and then Gurley gets hurt, and then it's CJ Anderson off the street. But when the odds of running backs getting hurt is alarmingly high, unfortunately, from a week by. And if you're taking 12 of those types of bets, the odds are pretty good that you're going to get 3 or 4 of them to hit for a 4-week stretch. And when you sort of think about that, right, and that's not even considering that there might be a spot weekly starter here and there.
Mhm.
And when you just think about that, there's so much viability in that, and you're painting largely by just broad brushes, right? You're just trying to take a lot of these bets, and there's anywhere between 6 and 16 of those types of positions in any given season. You have to look at depth charts and study that sort of thing, and but there's plenty of options for that. Doug Martin was a guy last year who was dirt cheap that was starter viable. Latavius Murray, right? We could go ad nauseum down this list, but holding guys like CJ Anderson, and I did actually at one point through he was caught. I said there's a possibility, and there was the waiver wire was really tight in that league. There wasn't many good options. I held him, and that has Damian Williams the same way. That has massive. That's the type of investment that can have a massive impact, that can have a massive payoff.
I mean, we saw it with Damian Williams, right?
Damian Williams won people leagues, right? You go back, what was it 2014, 2015? Tim Hightower won people money.
Yep.
And he didn't play. I actually looked at Damian Williams. Damian Williams had 0 warp through the regular season. He was a 0 warp player. He essentially did you no help, and had won you over the equivalent of over a half a game of regular season games in the playoffs, right? And that is and in 3 games. That is a massive, massive impact, right? That you just can't appreciate how important he was to players that had him last year. And so, I mean, making those types of bets and being patient with them, but also you'll know when to move on. And taking a lot of those bets really is something that I've become more and more through the research in the book and doing it in practice. It makes you feel really good. And you know what? I don't have to start a week 1 roster until week 1. Mm-hmm. And honestly, if I started a week 1 roster, if I had to pick right now, in this league, and this can be our last point or whatever, but in this league right now, it's a super flex. So there'd be 2 QBs starting. There'd be Kerryon Johnson would be my running back 1. Probably Latavius Murray would be my running back 2. And I would start 5 wide receivers.
Yep.
Right. But because the receivers that I like, again, I got deals on guys like Sammy Watkins. There might not be, maybe Devontae Adams after his second year. But that, in terms of profiles and odds and the possibility of what could happen on the upside, I don't remember, outside of Devontae Adams, a cheaper, massive upside bet than Sammy Watkins right now. And is it possible, if we've seen the best of Sammy Watkins, it will be an all-time outlier, and you just have to take the other side of that bet. And so you take those types of bets, and then you take a lot of the running back bets, and man, it feels, I don't have to start a week 1 roster. I feel like I could be really competitive early on, and that's not even baking in any of the upside that I have on the back end of my roster.
Yeah, I was kind of pissed. I was hoping to get him in like the 9th or 10th round, and he went at 8.
Sammy
Watkins, and he went at 805. And I actually think that that's a little low for him. I was hoping just to get him, 10th round, 9th, end of the night. I had 2 9th round picks.
I chose between Will Fuller and Sammy Watkins at pick 7 of the 8th round. It would have been wide receiver 32. I chose Will Fuller, and because they're really close to me, I chose Will Fuller, and then 3 rounds later, 10 receivers later, I got Sammy Watkins. So that is just, it's amazing that the market was that far apart on those 2 players. And you just look at the what could be, and we've seen it with Watkins in short sample sizes, right? We haven't seen a full season of dominant play from him, but we've seen really good stretches for him. And you know what? If I get 8 really good games from him, he's paying off that number,
Mhm.
If I get 8 games a season, and I think that's, again, injury bias and all of those things, injury prone bias and all that stuff, the payoff on a guy like him in the range of who he's going with is incredibly high in terms of those are the players that outproduce their draft pedigree, not the random day 2 wide receiver that you're taking in that range.
Do you think, well, and we got to end the show, but real quick, do you think that you made the decision of Will Fuller over Sammy Watkins? I did the same thing in the startup draft that I'm in. Do you think we're getting a little too cute with that? I mean, why should we be taking Will Fuller over Sammy Watkins? Like, think about their profiles, right? I mean, Sammy Watkins is a top 5 NFL draft pick, elite athlete, has some injury history, on the best offense in the NFL, versus Will Fuller, who he was a first round pick. He has an injury history as well. Not an elite producer in college. He ran fast. I don't know that he was necessarily explosion testing wise. Not on the best offense, in a good offense, I guess. Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Like when you actually break it down into profile versus profile, I think that you can make the case for Sammy Watkins above Will Fuller. So,
yeah, no, I think you can. I own more of Watkins than I do Fuller, and I usually don't diversify on the clock, but they were so close together in terms of how I look at them. But I think you're right. You can certainly look at the two of them and say there's no doubt that Watkins' profile is better. I went with, and if I go the other way in terms of if I go Fuller over Watkins, do I get a shot at if I go Watkins over Fuller, do I get a shot at Fuller 3 rounds later? I don't know, but it certainly worked out in this way, and so this one worked out for me, and I didn't bank on it happening. I suspected there was 0 chance it would happen, and it happened. So I was stunned, actually. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly an interesting conversation between those two players in particular.
All right, time to end the show. I can't believe that we carried on for as long as we did. This was supposed to be like 40 minutes, and I think we're over an hour now. But before I go, shameless plug here. I'm in several leagues with like openings for owners for orphans. Anyone who wants in these leagues, there are some pretty good teams. There's some dispersals. DM me or hit me up on Twitter. So I would appreciate it if we could get those filled. So, all right, Jordan,
do it.
Yeah. All right, time to call it time to wrap this up. All right, so I am Adam Wilson. I'm part of the Top Dog Dynasty podcast. You can find me at AJWilly2 on Twitter. Jordan, you do some work with UTH. You can find him at McNamara Dynasty. He wrote a book, Analytics of Dynasty. You can find that at analyticsofdynasty.com/shop. Rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you listen to us on. And that's it. So for Dynasty Football Analytics, we'll see you next time.